Hey, I'm Will Lombardi, and I'm here at Plumas Arts, Capital Arts Gallery, and I'm with the featured artists for the month of March, Josh Olivera and Jade Damron. It's good to be here with both of you.
Thanks.
I think, well, first I want to say how fun was Friday night? That was a great opening. It was a nice crowd down here, and it seemed like there was a lot of enthusiasm for the work both of you have here.
Yeah, it was, I think for many of us, Friday, that was the first big social event, in this age of COVID, and it felt, just felt good to be like, it was like a reminder, like, oh, I'm part of this community, and I'm still kind of new here because of COVID. I had a lot of friends and colleagues that showed up, and it felt like the whole 2 hours was pretty, there's a lot of people, and it was like a reminder, like, oh yeah, there's an arts community here, people come out.
Yeah.
And
it was special, and it was a relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard from students too that were really enjoyed like being out and seeing people looking at art, milling around, and yeah, they really enjoyed it a lot. So.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned this, students, right? Because both of you are art professors at Feather River College. And so maybe we should start there. Maybe Jay, can you give us some biographical information? Tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about your work, sort of that opening thumbnail sketch.
Yeah, I'm not a photographer. I mean, there's photographs here, but I'm an artist. I kind of work with objects, photographic imagery. Sometimes I merge them together. But this was an opportunity to show photographs, and it kind of made sense, I think, in this space to isolate some of my images. But so I'm an educator, an artist. I've been teaching for over 20 years. Making art since then and beyond. Lately, what I've been most interested in is making art objects that are encountered in the landscape with unsuspecting attention. So trail side pieces that somebody may bump into if they're on the PCT, for example. Some of those objects have been optical viewers with photo-based imagery in a viewing object that somebody could see. So they see the object, it's a sculpture, then they see the image in it. I'm changing things up a little bit lately with a new trailside series that don't involve photographic imagery. So that's maybe the art side of things, and then I've been teaching at Feather River for 10 years. I've been teaching in higher education for 22, I think. So. Yeah.
I hope we get to talk about some of your classes, because it was fun to encounter your students' work in the woods this last fall. I enjoyed that a lot, so remind me to circle back there.
Sure. Yeah.
Josh, can you give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. I took the position at FRC in August of 2019. It was a real dream come true for me. I taught at Chico State for 10 years or so before that as both a graduate student, and then got hired right after I graduated. I was lucky enough. And I've been an artist since, I would say like about 2000 is the first time I had a show of my work. And I used to be a painter. I used to be a figurative representational painter. I painted things that looked like photographs, and I measured myself by how realistic I could paint things or draw things. And then at a certain point I had a teacher that just said, who cares? Like, there's a lot of people that can do that. This doesn't say anything about you. And he forbid me to use art materials. I couldn't use any art supplies. I had to make art from things that I found or could salvage, nothing from the art store. And I think that was like this pivotal moment in my art career, and I started to look at the artists who I really admired, and it had nothing to do with what I was making. And so I started making stuff with wood, salvaged wood, things like I was using shellac and wood stain and like canvas and things that I was finding at job sites and on the banks of rivers, and I think that started this journey of kind of mixed media. And I lived in New York. I made work there, and I moved out to Tucson, and I made work there, and then decided I really, really wanted to pursue teaching if possible, and got my master's, went back to school, and did some of that in Germany. And I think for me, coming back home after that experience, I think I saw the Western landscape very, very differently and started responding in a particular way to that. After being away from it for so long and coming back, just had this very like awakening moment, like just saw the West like in a totally different way.
So I want to pause for a second.
Sure.
Listening to both of you suggests maybe 3 different questions to me. I feel like I heard both of you say something about when you started being an artist. And so one of my questions might be, when did you realize that art was your identity? And then a second question, and we can rehash these however we want to, but another thing that occurred to me is you mentioned this paradigmatic moment when your art changed. And so Jay, I wonder if you had something like that, or Josh, if you've had more, if there have been these other like points that each of you can look to in your development. And then finally, it does occur to me that both of you are dealing with Western landscapes in, I don't know if novel is the right way to put it, but unexpected ways. So if we start at the start then, maybe Jay, can you tell me what that was like? Was there an aha moment of, I am an artist, this is what I do, this is my identity?
I don't know if I had an aha moment, but I mean, I did a heightened awareness moment, I guess. Like in high school, I was studying to be an architect, taking architecture drafting classes in high school, and then I took 2 fine arts classes, and at that point changed my course for what I wanted to do and study. So it's definitely a heightened awareness moment or time period for sure. I would say one significant marker for me was, as an undergrad doing sculpture, I had a performance art professor who was also a feminist art historian, who I think like taking classes with her in addition to doing my sculptural practice, I think made me understand more fully that I wasn't just satisfied with making discrete objects to sell, that there had to be a kind of cultural or contextual engagement for me that extended beyond just making purchasable objects or commodities or art, gallery exhibit kind of work. And that was more of a transformation over a few semesters, but that was definitely like a key kind of time period for me, for sure. So doing installation work and doing performance art, doing ephemeral work, all started at that point.
Fascinating, right? There's more that I'd love to bundle in there with you, for sure, because listening to you talk, I want to speak with both of you also about perhaps the theoretical apparatus that surrounds your work, and guides your work, because obviously it's a heavy influence around that. But Josh, I knew I was an artist in 2000 because, was there a moment before that, or how did this thing happen?
I was always kind of a dorky kid that could draw, so I always had that, identity maybe from a really young age, like even in, school, people would be like, like I remember like one of my first friends that I made in Chico was really into Dungeons and Dragons, and he had all these characters, and wanted me to draw his characters,
Oh, that's
you know,
great.
so that like, you know,
Yeah.
I was befriended the super dorks by being able to draw.
Yeah.
So 2000, what happened is I started out as a photographer. I was a photographer in high school. We had a photojournalism class, and I think for me, the camera after high school and community college, it was like a social lubricant. I always had this camera, and it got me into places, and it also meant I didn't really have to like put myself out there. You know, it was like you can hide behind a camera.
Because you're doing this
Yeah.
thing.
And people identified that, and for me it was about music and seeing live shows, and I was able to worm my way into live music shows, a lot of, you know, punk rock and jazz and indie rock. And I befriended this guy Carlos, who was a way better photographer than I was, and we would get these passes, and I started making paintings based on a lot of these photographs. And in 2000 we showed together, and we sold the entire show at the opening.
Awesome.
And then we did it again, and it was just like, oh wow, this is a thing. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that was my identity for a while, and it wasn't until that moment I spoke of earlier where somebody was like, you know, he wasn't like completely dismissive, but he was like, you know, a lot of people can do this,
Yeah.
and why are you painting photographs?
Were there other moments? So then that leads into the second part of that whole aha moment that sort of propelled you ultimately in this direction. Have there been other moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit. I mean, I think probably like Jay, that was right about the time I got into art school seriously and started taking, you know, art history classes, but, you know, really about more contemporary work and seeing what had happened and seeing that, you know, that the traditional art had been kind of dismantled at a certain point, and I fell in love with people that were doing things that were opposite of what I was doing. You know, I was making products.
Yeah. So do you feel, and you know, maybe we can sort of pivot into that shared question then, that I think is about Western landscape, and also maybe some of the theory that surrounds it, but this idea of dismantling. Are you still, or did you ever purposely set out in your art to dismantle, or are you rather rethinking or reimagining? What is your position, do you feel?
That's a good question. I think maybe like Jay, for a long time I've been somebody who follows ideas rather than materials, and this just happens to be what I've been doing lately. But you know, I usually follow ideas, and whatever media makes the most sense to express that is usually what I'll go with. And you know, so but the dismantling part, I think for me was like, for me personally, it was about, you know, art historically was about picture making a picture and fooling the eye into thinking that there was illusionistic space in this flat thing, or making a sculpture that was, you know, so grandiose and beautiful and convincing. And at a certain point, that tradition dried up, or it just was, it ceased to be interesting for people. And so for me, I think there was a dismantling of like, I don't need to make pictures anymore. I don't need to make, because you get that question like, you know, oh, it looks like a photograph, so there it's good, or I can tell what it is, you know. And I'd get people a lot of times when I started doing these mixed media works, it would say like, how come you don't paint? You should paint people again. You should paint the jazz musicians. Those were so nice, you know. And I just had kind of, you could do that with a camera.
Yeah. So then, Jay, if we just reset just a notch, have you had aha moments in your trajectory the way Josh has described? And then, you know, can you say something about the work that you're doing now in terms of the theory or the ideas behind it?
Yeah, so there's one story to relate is an object action artwork that I developed in graduate school that was a culmination of things, so it wasn't just a quick aha moment, but it was still this sort of realization of the work I'd been doing for a long time, where I seemed to be able to merge my skills in using materials to make something that is compelling to spend time with or look at. Also use language and get a handle on how to use language to mix with those objects, but also put it into context. So I made this artwork where I used a bunch of apples that I bundled together in a particular manner, as if I might be like walking around selling them, but they were also coupled with these, like what I called notes speak at the time, like little folded up piece of paper. So the apples were impaled with the notes, and then I had them so that I could kind of carry all these things, and I walked around Chinatown and with speaking a few phrases. So I was interested in this space between like art, culture, commerce, like this kind of like confusing, like what is this, what's this guy doing, where's he from? And I guess that question is, where does this come from, was interesting to me, and realizing that I could kind of merge those things and put it into some kind of context was just like a really amazing experience. And the responses I got from like the older gentlemen out selling fruit at the vegetable center in Chinatown, to just like people asking if they ate an apple, would they be poisoned? And so that experience was really a great kind of marker for me with my work.
So you mentioned you said the word earlier, ephemera. Mm-hmm. Was this is obviously an ephemeral work.
Right.
How does something that is, what's the word, transitory, mm-hmm. How does that figure into what you were doing then, and how does that then fast forward into what you're doing now? How did you get from that urban ephemeral space into dealing with objects in a natural landscape?
Yeah, I think it's just when I was doing that piece in San Francisco, I was embedded in that landscape, that urban landscape, that context. It was informing my thoughts and how I thought about my work and how to put things into play. It's kind of no different here. Like, I'm constantly, like Josh, constantly spending time out in the landscape. It's a part of just how I move through life. Mm-hmm. Just like how it was, how I moved through life in the Bay. So it's not really that different. It's just that it's not urban. It's a natural landscape. It's rural. So there's not a real shift there. It's just kind of applying it in a different context. But like the trailside stuff is me kind of tapping into opportunities that this kind of area presents in more natural landscapes than, say, I would say in Chinatown walking down Powell Street. But,
and perhaps more stable, but still not built to remain in that space.
Right, yeah.
So, listening to you speak and thinking, Josh, where we left off, is there an idea that you are pursuing now, and where do these ideas, how do they find you?
It's a good question. I think lately I'm responding to objects that I collect that have a particular kind of, they tell a particular kind of story to me, or I react, and things like these old scout bows or these old wood planes, and they, so I'm kind of reacting to objects, but I think about things in terms of the landscape a lot, but I'm trying to think of it as a system that we interact with, that we have ruined in a lot of ways, that we're trying to repair, that we are symbiotically living with in some ways, and then just totally destroying in other ways. And it's just so apparent in the West. I mean, I had this one of those moments that maybe you're asking about when I got back from a year and a half in Germany, and immediately, like Jay was saying, like we're both people that spend half of the year sleeping outside, you know. And I got back here, and you know, there's none of that in Europe. So I was chomping at the bit to get out in the wild spaces, right? And anywhere I would drive, you know, you'd see these signs as you were entering the Lhasa National Forest or Plumas, and what does it say? It says land of many uses. And then you just look around and you see that exact paradigm everywhere.
Yeah.
Clear-cut logging and massive erosion and, you know, crappy buildings that are falling into the river, you know, and then people just build right back on it, you know, and it was just like this real kind of slap in the face. Those are things I hadn't noticed as much before. And so I think in a way I'm kind of responding to that. Like I'm, you know, rather than trying to like show you this picture of the landscape, I'm taking detritus and things that I find or things that remind me of how that was put there.
That were used or ill-used or never used.
I mean, yeah, there's still vestiges of manifest destiny everywhere. We can go around and say, well, there it is. And so I think there's ways that I think about these as landscape. They're obviously very strongly horizontal, you know, in a lot of ways. But the objects kind of, to me, just, it's kind of like a call and response thing.
Yeah. I love it. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thanks, Bill.
And I'm looking forward to talking about some of these pieces. So Jay, we're looking at this photograph called Grouse Mountain Area. And you say you're not a photographer per se.
Right.
But we did speak of these sort of, I suppose, found objects. And in particular, you've been making these tripods. And the tripod with the water bag is what I've experienced, I assume, since this was taken.
Yes. Yeah.
But what would you like to tell us about this image and how it was made, and I think maybe why?
Well, I was backpacking with my partner, and this is in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. You know, when I'm out and about in the landscape, I'm often looking for photographs. I mean, I'm not a professional photographer, but I'm an artist, and photographs part of my practice. So I'm always looking for interesting images, but I was also kind of experimenting with this tripod piece, and I realized it's such a beautiful setting to play around with that idea while we were backpacking.
So in terms of composition, was the background the thing? Was the placement of the tripod, right? Because in your description of your work, you talk about photographs and their ability to soothe the desire for strange objects.
Yeah.
Is something like that at play here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly the backdrop, the entry point that this place provides in deeper into the mountains. I mean, I photographed this without the tripod, so I have like a number of frames without. But yeah, like just this sort of stage that this offers for this potential future object was also on my mind when I took the photograph.
Fascinating. I enjoy that a lot.
Thanks.
Jay, this is a second very different image from the other ones that you've hung and from the last one we looked at, Soledad, California. What is the impetus for it, and what were you trying to create here?
It's a photograph of my partner's dad's garage, and we were visiting. I brought my surfboard, and I walked into the garage. He had moved my surfboard there, and it just, to me, was just a great photograph for me personally. Maybe one of my favorite images from that year, which was, I think, last year. So, like, to me, I'm often just snapping things that just are really compelling to me. And I kind of just love the richness of what's going on here. And the surfboard suggests still this kind of Western landscape sort of way of activating the body. But also, it's in Soledad, California, which, you know, it's just sort of probably a place most people don't go. It's kind of not Central Valley, but...
And there's not a ton of surf there.
No, but anyway, so it's, I guess, just my movements around Western landscapes. I'm just taking pictures that may not be literally mountainscapes or desertscapes or high desertscapes, but they're still, to me, register certain notes that still make me think about place and a specific context and place and time.
Yeah, it is fascinating, right? The truck resonates as that Western mobility, but maybe nowhere else to go kind of a thing. And then, you know, surf culture in a lot of ways sort of adopted much of the ethos of the frontier and exploration and et cetera. But with a much mellower vibe, I think, right?
Right.
No, this is really striking, and how wonderful was it? I don't know what the green is.
I can't answer that either. Jen, my partner, told me, but I've forgotten what that was. You know, and you know, the man's garage, you know, the constant repair that's going on, like the inattentiveness to finishing things, all those things are kind of interesting to me in this photo.
Oh man, powerful. Thanks.
Sure.
So we're looking at Cut Bank. Josh, there's so many questions here, but you've been talking about found objects and we've been talking about the natural world, yet these are found objects that are entirely man-made.
Yeah.
And it's an object that would have made more objects.
Yeah.
So what is happening here that you want to share with us?
I sought out some of these old hand planes. I found one a long time ago and used it, but I sought these out and I like them. They actually remind me of boat forms, like the bows do as well. But yeah, like you said, there are also things that made that extraction kind of paradigm, you know, that you pull things out, you make tools out of the wood and, you know, the ore, and then you use those tools to make, you know, and it's just the form itself was really interesting to me and captivating. I like you know, it's got this blade and this wedge, but it reminded me of a boat form, and I was thinking about it as boat forms when I saw these out.
This line here is just so dramatic compared to the wood grain and the right angles.
I was thinking about this as just, I kept thinking about this, you know, the object and what it wanted to do. And so these were pieces that I had, you know, basically I'll build up layers and layers with wood and resin and then kind of shave it. And then I save those pieces and use them later. And so I was thinking about that line continuing all the way through, and the idea of a cut bank. And I was thinking about this and the other piece, that there's a part that's real haunting to me in the book, Sometimes a Great Notion, where it's always talking about how the Wakanda Aga is always taking the pieces of their property and their house away, and he just keeps shoring it up with cables and concrete and more timber, and like he's never going to move until the river just takes him. It's that stubbornness.
Yeah, so. Fascinating. Thanks a bunch. I feel like I've watched this being born at some point, so I'm glad we're talking about this piece. With all your work, the objects themselves seem to be the focal point, and yet I don't want to dismiss what you're doing with color. So whatever you'd like to tell us about this, I wonder if you can at least speak in part to your choices with color and how you're manipulating it.
Sure. So this particular blue, as well as the red orange in the last piece, come from a particular family of compounds called azo or azo. I've heard it pronounced both ways, but it's a synthetic organic compound, and most of them are byproducts of mining. So there was this, after the Industrial Revolution, there was an explosion of really bright, intense colors that we'd never had before as artists, or in fabric dye, or whatever, right?
Look how lucky we are.
Yeah. And so this particular blue, which reminds me of some of my favorite places as far as rivers and alpine lakes and places I like to spend my time, and you know, you want to dive in, but there's also this kind of, there's a flip side to that, you know, and that this color is also like, comes from a very toxic, you know, process, but stripping the earth of its ore and minerals, and you know these it's often talked about these, like how beautiful these mining tailing pools are, you know, and I just imagine, you know, it's like even the uninitiated would look at it and, you know, just like, oh wow, it's beautiful, but you wouldn't drink
But
it.
also,
Yeah.
So just to continue with this idea of toxicity, does the bow then factor in?
Yeah, again, I chose it originally just because it's such a beautiful, strong horizontal when put like this, and reminds me of like nautical apparatuses, and like it reminds me of boat forms. But the bow is also, you know, certainly for my dad's generation, this was probably the first weapon that you got as a boy. You know, you'd get your pocket knife and then you get this. And it's also, you know, a kind of strange form of cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
You know, and you'd graduate to a gun or a rifle from this, you know, a shotgun or something, and you know, that to me is kind of an interesting, you know, underbelly to the graceful, you know, line and the beauty of the wood and everything. There's like this weird kind of
Yeah, it's intriguing when you put this narrative together of the color and the bow itself.
yeah.
Thanks a bunch.